Okay, all right, good. So this is the other set of videos. This is an interview of Martin Lester Sornborger, and he's going to tell us about his life.
So,
And you can talk to me too if you want.
oh, okay.
So you were born...
I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, to Florence Seymour Sornborger and Lester Martin Sornborger. And I don't remember a whole lot growing up, but I was thinking about this the other day.
What was the date you were born?
January 6, 1934, 9:25 supposedly.
9:25. Okay.
Yeah. That was the time that was in my baby book.
In the morning or in the evening?
Yeah, 9:25 in the morning. Yeah. And the one thing that I remember specifically is when I was probably 2.5 years old, I had a Popeye doll.
Okay.
And Popeye was a classic figure back in those days, and that's really the basic remembrance. And then another thing that I remember was the butterfly table in the living room.
Yeah.
I can remember being on Davidson Street and climbing on that, and the leaf broke.
Oh, okay. So now Davison Street would have been where you
Davison
lived?
Street was where we lived before we went to Long Meadow.
Okay.
Yeah,
So how old were you when you moved to Long Meadow?
4.5.
Okay.
Yeah, so 4.5, and I went to kindergarten when I was 4.5.
Mm-hmm.
And Miss Benner was the kindergarten teacher, and one of the things that I remember about that was that she told the kids that the way you walk with a pair of scissors is to hold the pointy part.
Yeah.
Well, we had scissors that didn't have points on them, but she insisted that we if we were going to walk around with these scissors, that we walk with them that way.
Yeah.
And one other thing that I remember particularly about that time was, in those days they had what they call a Glidden tour, and it was a bunch of antique cars. I mean, Stanley steamers and old Rolls Royces. I mean, this is 1920s kind of stuff.
Right.
And I can remember being let out of school to see that. And one other thing that I remember particularly is that when I was 4.5, it would have been 38. And that was the hurricane, the time of the hurricane.
Yeah.
And we got out of school. They let us out of school because the weather was poor, and went home on the trolley car. And I'll never forget it. And then the 38 hurricane arrived, and my father had a Plymouth car. And he drove into the garage. My mother and I had opened up the garage doors. He drove in to the garage doors, and there were 2 apple trees that went like this right across the. I mean, these apple trees.
So they missed the car, but they came right.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, he was in the garage.
Right.
But these apple trees were probably 2.5 feet in diameter. And anyway, one of the things that after the fact that we found out about that was there was a horseshoe under one of the apple trees.
That's cool.
That was a good luck kind of thing. And then at 4.5, because we were in a new neighborhood, and
Right, so that you moved from Davison to,
moved from Davidson Street
yeah,
to Longmeadow, and you had to become acquainted with other kids that were around.
right.
And another, so went over to Barry Beckwith's place, and he had a badminton set up in his side yard. And I went over there, and of course I was a new kid on the block, and these were older kids.
Yeah.
I was physically a big person, and they tried to pants me, pull down my pants, and I think it was Owen Sutton that did this, and I hit him as hard as I could hit him in the stomach, and that was the end of that show. But after that, I was accepted, and these guys, I've known these guys for 70 years, or more than 70 years, 75 years.
Yeah.
There's Barry and Charlie, Barry Beckwith and Charlie Drummy, who's passed away. He passed away last year. Owen Sutton. Frankie wasn't there. And those are the guys that I remember.
So they were all in the neighborhood?
Well, they were all. Oh yeah, they were all in the neighborhood, and it was it was it was an interesting kind of. And then later on, as I think of these things, there was a place. There was a little pond that was a dammed up pond that was probably as big as this house, maybe bigger, maybe a little bit bigger, and we'd skate on that pond, and some kid had made a boat, a skiff kind of boat, but it was out of canvas.
Okay.
And it was just a wooden frame.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you had to be real careful. Anyway, that was, in order to get to this place, we had to go through a piece of property owned by the Manzeys. And in those days, people of Italian descent were thumbs down.
Okay.
You know, that was just the way it was. But and there was a shed on this property, and I'll never forget it. So we were out, and this is all sand, and so we were out there, and we dug a hole, and we were supposed to tunnel through the sand,
Yeah.
into the shed, right? And I can remember being with a spoon,
Yeah.
digging a hole, and I mean, I'm in probably 6 or 8 feet as a kid,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I've often thought about that, you know, if anybody jumped up and down on that
Yeah, you
thing,
would
I
have
would
done.
see you later.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, wait a minute. So was that in the same place as this pond?
well, it was on the way to the pond.
Okay.
It was
Okay.
essentially it was on the way to the pond. You know, in today's world, it doesn't
Yeah. Right.
even
It
exist.
doesn't exist anymore.
But then
Well, so let me ask you, like around
Yeah.
this time, what was the family like on weekends? Would you go see your grandparents? You know, where were people?
well, yeah. On weekends, I would go to my grandparents, like my father's mother and father.
Yeah.
Grandpa Seymour, Grandpa Sornborger, and Grandma Sornborger.
Okay.
And I would go to church.
Yeah.
Christian Science church.
Yeah.
Every freaking Sunday.
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
And that was it. Now, I'll never, you know, so, and this was almost every single weekend.
Yeah.
And my grandmother would give me a dime to put in the collection,
Yeah.
you know, the collection thing.
Yeah.
And the other story about that was that I remember was that so my grandmother was the teacher, okay, and
Like for the church school or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. You know, I was probably
Sunday school. Yeah.
5 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
And so we were sitting around in a circle on these little chairs, and my grandmother asked me what the 3 books of Christian Science were. I think I've told you this.
I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah.
But tell me, I mean,
And so I forget what I said, but part of what I said was the prayer book. Well, the prayer. So we get home, we get back to my grandparents' place, and my grandmother says, "Come up to my room," and she said. So we got in the room, she closed the door, and I said, "Oh, what's going on here?" And anyway, she said, "Yeah," she said, "the prayer book is a Catholic book," and that was in those days that was a no-no. You know, that was a big thing about my father marrying my mother, because you know, she was Catholic, or she was brought up as a Catholic.
Right.
And that was, you know, my grandmother finally got over that whole thing, but my grandfather never did. Never, at the age of 93, he was nasty to my mother.
Really?
Yeah, and so anyway, but yeah, so I spent a lot of time over at my grandparents' place, and
Where were they physically? So in other words,
They
did
were-
you drive over, or could
yeah,
you walk there?
they drove. My parents drove me over. My father would drive me over.
Yeah.
They were out. Well, what was called Winchester Square.
In
down
Springfield or
in Springfield. Yeah, it was like the first part of Route 20
Mhm.
that went out toward Wilbraham
Yep.
and all those places. But yeah, so the one of the other things that I particularly remember was we built huts in the wood.
Mhm.
You know, and in early days, we'd thatch a roof. We'd cut boughs of
Yeah, from trees or-
hemlock, and we'd weave a roof.
Yeah.
And that was, and then we'd peel the bark off and tie it around the, you know, that's how we attached stuff.
Yeah.
No nails at all.
Right.
And then as time went on, Eddie Fenton, you've heard me talk about Eddie
Yeah,
Fenton.
I think so.
And Eddie Fenton was a genius. I mean, he had an IQ of 190 out of 200.
Yeah.
And at any rate, so as things went on, there were woods all behind behind the ballpark, actually, and behind Eddie Fenton's house, and we built a hut out there. I mean, this was classy hut. And the first hut that we had was called a Y. As a matter of fact, I've got a piece of wood upstairs somewhere.
Yep.
that was sawed out of the Y in the
Okay.
path.
Yeah.
And Donnie Larson and Eddie Fenton and Barry Beckwith and myself were members of this group,
Elite club.
elite club, and so one day I'm out there, and we chopped all these
Huge.
big hemlock trees down like this. You get arrested today if you did that. So I'm out there, and we all had hatchets, and I had a hatchet when I was 6 years old, and then Uncle Spike told me to cut the legs off of the dining room table. So anyway, I'm out there at the first hut, and I walk up behind Barry, and crack, he gets me right between the eyes.
This is hatchet.
I've got with the back end of the hatchet.
Yeah.
So I'm bleeding like a stuck pig, and Donnie Larson was knowledgeable. He was another bright person, and they wrapped me up. They patched, they put a, like a butterfly clamp on the ear, and then they had gauze and they wrapped my head up. So I came out of the woods and with this Band-Aid around my head, and then the other part. So after that, we built another hut. Now this hut had a sheet metal stove in it, and bunks, and the whole thing in it. And Donnie Larson was handy with tools, so we had a thing in the roof that, 9 padlocks on the front, on the door, and all that kind of stuff. And after a while, we built an addition to this hut. First of all, so we had oak floors and the story there was Mr. Pomeroy owned a farm, and his son Bradford Pomeroy was my age, which is neither here nor there, but out in back he had these huge, they were like 10-inch oak, 2 inches thick planks, and it took 2 of us to
to steal them.
to steal them, and so that was what the floor of the hut was. Anyway, so we built this addition onto the hut, put a door in and all that kind of stuff, and so we go out there, and stuff would be moved.
Yeah.
We couldn't figure out what was going on. Obviously moved.
Yeah.
A table would be in a wrong place and all that kind of stuff. And this happened on a regular basis. So we couldn't figure out what because all the locks were still there and all that kind of thing. And so Eddie Fenton sat up in one of the trees for a couple of days, and he discovered that Owen Sutton and Charlie Drummy had dug a hole and come up through the floorboards, and they covered the hole up so that with boards so that you couldn't see it, and it was at any rate with leaves and all that, and so that's how we found out about that. We never found out about that. Well, he found out about it, but it was only after a long time.
Yeah.
And so anyway. and so to continue on with the whole story here.
So the hut that you had out in the woods, this would have been when you were 8, 10?
Oh no,
Older?
12, 13.
12, 13.
13,
Okay.
13, 14.
Okay.
Oh yeah. It was, we were older.
Yeah.
And one thing that happened was they decided that they were going to build some houses, which they have
Right
now. And Eddie Fenton and Donnie Larson, so they had a digger out there,
Jesus.
and
Yeah.
they took and put sugar in the gas tank. And that was the end of that.
Yeah.
But in those days, one other thing that comes to mind was the what we used to call the pastures was a large area. It was a farm, a farm with a dingle
Mm-hmm.
down and on the right hand side or on the left hand side facing out toward where the hut was, there were these divots. I mean, I don't know how they got there, but they were holes in the ground, and the grass
Mm-hmm.
had grown in. And so we were out there one day. It was Charlie, Johnny, Bugsy Walsh,
Okay.
and myself, and I think that was it. And we were tossing matches into the poof, like this.
Okay.
The next thing we know, somebody tossed a match in, and the whole pastures got on fire. So that was not a cool thing.
Run away.
And yeah, well, I ran through the woods to Marilyn Green's house and told him, I said, there's a fire in the pastures. And by the time I had gotten back there, of course, the fire trucks were all there and
Right.
so forth. Yes. And so anyway, I got on the books as, lighting this fire. So with Charlie and
Yeah.
Johnny and Jimmy and Bugsy Walsh was never on the books because Bugsy Walsh evaporated. He left. He left in a major kind of way. But so there was a chief of police by the name of Yardsley, and he'd been with the FBI. He was a real nice person, real nice guy, and of course, for better or for worse, all the cops knew who we were, and so next to Owen's house, there was a vacant house, and somebody, and we used to sneak in there, go through the cellar window, and somebody had lit a fire by the newel post, and it burned right through the floor. So we never thought much about it. And so I'm up in bed one day with the hives. I used to get hives as a kid. And my mother calls upstairs and she says, "You have a visitor." And I said, "Who is it?" "Chief Yardsley." So he came up, and the reason I'm telling you this is because of the fire in the pastures.
Oh, yeah,
right?
right.
You know, so I'm on the books as
Right. Fire starter.
Fire starter, and so he comes up and quizzes me about this fire in the house next to Owens.
Yeah.
And you know, I said, you know, we used to go in there and had rolls of paper and you know, all. Anyway, and so I satisfied him with that situation.
Did they ever find out, or do you?
They never, no, as far as I know, they never did find out
Right.
who set the fires. Who knows?
Yeah.
We had no idea.
Yeah.
Had absolutely no idea of who set the fires, but man, there are a lot of stories. But the grandparents, that's how I started fishing. And I had a steel rod, a 9-foot steel rod,
Mm-hmm.
and my grandfather belonged to a club called the Isaac Walton Club,
Okay.
and they leased a stream, a whole stream, about 5 miles of a stream, and it was posted. And as I said the other day to Nathan, I said, you know, today people just don't pay any attention to that kind of thing.
Right.
And anyway, so, but it was worm, we fished with worms.
Yeah.
And you know, the trout were probably 8 inches long or something like that. But we went up there fairly often. And I can remember going up there on with my father, and I was sitting on his shoulders with a fly rod, and he'd tell me,
Okay.
fish over there, there's got to be a trout there. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so that's how all that began.
Yeah, so this is with your grandfather. Was it out in the country, or was it?
Oh
near-
yeah, it was,
Okay.
yeah, it was out in the country. It was basically it was in Worthington, Massachusetts.
Okay.
From Worthington down to where the dam is, the Knightville Dam,
Okay.
which is a flood control dam
Okay.
that they put in, I don't know how many years ago, but
Right.
some time ago.
Right.
Yeah, and so you talk about Worthington, and brings to mind Doc Baldwin was a friend of my father's, and his father was a friend of my grandfather's, and he was a dentist,
Okay.
and he had a place in Worthington, and he was a bona fide character. And there were a couple of things. There were a lot of things actually that Doc Baldwin did, and that's how I learned how to drive. He had a Model A Ford truck,
Yep.
and he had a big field out in the back, and he'd say, well, you don't have to pay any attention to the trees. He said, just run them over. They were little
Right.
trees. And then one of the other stories was, so we go into and I think I told you this story about the bow and arrow.
You can tell it again.
Well, so we go into the room that was the living room, bedroom, all that kind of stuff, dining room, and he gets out his bow. It's a long bow, and so he's got a hunting arrow, a pointy arrow on it, and he says, "What do you want me to hit?" So finally I said, "Well, how about that log over by the fireplace?" It wasn't far away, probably 30 feet away, or most. So he pulls back, and then he says, "You got to tip the bow like this, because if you hold it upright, it'll hit the ceiling, and there are all kinds of marks on the ceiling. So he pulls back the bow and sinks the goddamn arrow, about this deep into this log. And he goes over and breaks it off, and he hands me the bow and he says, "Okay," he said, you shoot whatever you want, right?" So, and he goes off into the kitchen. He was making dinner or whatever. So I said, "Well," so I got the bow and I pulled back, and I was aiming at 2x4. The bunk beds were 2x4s. So I pulled back and I pulled the whole thing, pulled it all the way back, let it go right through the side of the house, right out into the front yard. And so I go out into the kitchen, and I tell Doc Baldwin, he says, what the hell are you waiting for? He says, "Go out and pick up the arrow." So the arrow's sitting on the lawn out there. But he was friends with Wesson of Smith and Wesson, the firearm people. And Wesson had given him what they call a kit gun, which is a .22 caliber. It's a small firearm like this pistol. So I'm sitting on the porch one day, and he said, so he comes out with a pistol, and he said, "Here," he said, you can practice shooting this." So he said, so the truck is sitting there, and the license plate had a 0 on it, right? So he said, "What do you want me to hit?" I said, "Well, hit the 0 on the license plate." Pow! And put a hole right through the middle of the 0, and hands me the gun and says, "Okay, you can do what you want." But the other classic, and Doc Baldwin said, "Here's a bow and arrow. Go out and shoot what you want, but don't shoot the arrow up into the air," right? And so they come back after a while, and they're missing an arrow. And so Doc says, "Well, where's the arrow?" And Bobby said, "Well, we lost it in the brush," and something like that. And Doc says, "You didn't shoot it up in the air, did you?" And Bobby said, "No." And so some time goes by, and Doc says, "How high up did that arrow go?" And Bobby says, "Oh, well, no, you should see it." Oh, God. But that's the kind of guy that's just the kind of guy he was. He showed me how to throw an axe, like this.
Yeah.
But anyway, so.
So Doc Baldwin, you would have known him from.
Well, he was my dentist
Okay.
to start with.
I see. Okay.
He was in those days. You sat in a dentist chair, and they didn't have any of these high-speed drills.
Right.
It was grin and bear it.
Yeah.
And I'd sit there like this, and he says, when it hurts, let me know. And I never said a word.
Right.
And he had a thing that went around the cord that drove the drill bit.
Yeah.
But I've spent more time in dentist chairs than Jesus. I hate to think about it. Really. So, but you wanted me to talk about the alcohol business,
Yeah, well, actually, before we get there,
Yeah.
so, because you're talking right now about when you're, you know, kind of, young, what about teenage years and then getting up to college, you know?
Well, teenage years were, well,
You know, when you were in high school, you know.
the the uh, the first girl that I ever was madly in love with was what was her name? Well, I can't think of it quickly. And she was the first girl I ever kissed, and it was, and I'll never forget it. It was right behind the community house in Long Meadow, and
Was it a dance or just?
yeah, it was a dance. Yeah, yeah. I went to dancing school. You know, for several years. That was a real privilege in those days. Mr. Ryder and his wife ran the school, and that was the white gloves and, you know, necktie and the whole bit, patent leather shoes.
Yeah.
But so yeah, junior high was like I said, I was a big kid, and or physically big. And one of the things that I remember was there was a friend of mine by the name of Eddie Mall, and he ended up going to Harvard, and he was really bright, but he was a big rugged kid, and there was another kid by the name of Ted Olmsted, and we had the gym teacher was a guy that knew Uncle Spike back in high school.
So Uncle Spike being Papa's brother.
Yeah, yeah, and so and we had a 3-round boxing thing, right? And this kid Ted Olmsted was going to clean my clock, and I mean, and he could have. He was another big kid, and so Eddie Mall steps in and says, "No," he says, "you're going to fight me." And saved my neck. And jeez.
Well, this was when you say boxing match, you mean this was like official with school, or this is like
No,
you guys
just
are having
school.
a fight?
No, just school.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it was school. It was organized.
Okay.
You know,
With
you
gloves
had
on.
big,
Yeah.
heavy, you know,
Yeah.
8 or 16-ounce gloves or whatever,
Yeah.
and like that. But yeah, and
So for you, so talking to Mom, she was very social, dated lots of people and so forth. You just talked about your first kiss, you know. Did you go out with lots of girls in high school? Was that kind of common?
no, I didn't. No. In high school, I was one of the people that did this, you know, went out with girls steady.
Right.
It was either that or
not.
at all.
Right.
And when I was in high school, I had a car when I was 16, and I would have been what, a junior in high school, I think, at the time, and I went with a girl, Joyce Williams, at any rate, that was a mad, passionate love affair,
Yeah.
so to speak. And so, like I say, I said, I had this car. My father did work for a car dealer in Norwich, Connecticut, whose wife was extremely wealthy. I mean, you know, textile wealth,
Right.
type of thing. Back today it wouldn't mean anything, but back in those days she was really, really wealthy. and her husband, I don't know where, I think her husband died, or something like that. And she wanted to give me a car. She was going to give me an Oldsmobile 88, a brand new Oldsmobile 88. And my father said, probably be a good idea to give him something a little bit bent up instead of. So I had a 1941 Chevrolet, which was it was sedan. It wasn't a bad car. And anyway, that was that. But so another part of the story is that as a senior, I had a teacher, an English teacher by the name of Mr. Pease, and he was a very strict person, and I was flunking English, and Uncle Spike, my Uncle Spike was superintendent of public buildings in Springfield. So he got to the principal of Classical High School, Mr. Chatto, and said, let's do something about this. And got back to Pease, and I flunked English, period. That was the end of the show. So I was trying to get in. I was thinking about college. This is my senior year. I was accepted at Williams because I was a runner, basically. And then Uncle Wynn, who went to Middlebury, said, "Why don't you go up for an interview at Middlebury?" So anyway, I did that, and I went up and saw Stan Wright, who was a fraternity brother of Uncle Wynn's, and stayed at the Deke House. And Sonny Sullivan he was another growing up person, and so Stan Wright said, "Fine." He said, "You're accepted, except you've got to get at least a C average in English." So that meant summer school. So I went to I spent the whole summer, my senior year, at summer school, and I got A+.
Right.
I took all the courses. I took, I don't know how many, 3 English courses and a trigonometry course and a speed reading course and all that kind of stuff. And so I got into, so that was fine.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into Middlebury. But the interesting part about that whole situation was I got into Middlebury, and my father, I knew my father had a drinking problem, okay, in a major kind of way. And
so how did you know that? What was it that you had to deal with?
Well, mostly through my mother.
Okay.
I can remember, and I think I've told you this, but I can remember my mother going into the closet and getting a shotgun out. Happy New Year, that was meant for my father.
To protect herself, or
no, she was just going to shoot my father
because she was angry at him.
Yeah,
because he was drunk.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't a fall down drunk, but he was obnoxious.
Yeah.
Well, you had that
No,
experience.
I want to hear.
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of from
yeah,
you
yeah,
what-
yeah, and that was a unforgettable experience, to be
Right.
honest with you.
Right.
So anyway, but that being said, so I get to Middlebury and I'm aware of this kind of thing. And I think the first day I'm there, or first little while that I'm there, these guys are having a party. And there's all kinds of booze around and stuff like that. And I can remember saying something about it to my parents, or to my mother in particular. And that was not cool for me. And then,
Wait, it was not cool that they had all the booze around? Or-
no, and they were half in the bag,
Right,
you know,
right.
and that wasn't something that I was used to.
Right.
So, so anyway, that situation, I had 2 roommates, and I had $40 a month, and I earned the $40 a month, and it was, through work.
Right.
And my roommate, Toby Bedell, had $40 a week,
Yeah.
and so which is more or less neither here nor there, but so down the hall there was a guy, Pete Zecker was one of them, and I don't remember the name of the other guy offhand, but so I went down to their room, and I was thinking about being a chemistry major, on the MIT plan kind of thing. And they were having what they called stingers, and a stinger is I can't remember. It's brandy, and
Yeah.
it's a heavy duty alcohol thing.
Yeah.
And that was it. I was, that was
So you had to drink and.
yeah, and I basically I was an alcoholic right off.
Yeah. So in other words, it was like you had the drink and it's like, this is what I want.
Yeah, right, yeah, it was, that was, and that lasted for a long time. I mean, so I'm probably 18, 19, something like that. That lasted until I was 40, and I quit drinking at the age of 40.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but the Middlebury experience. One of the things that I remember about. There are a lot of things I remember about the Middlebury experience. Number one being in the fraternity, which they don't have anymore, supposedly.
Which fraternity was it?
Alpha Tau Omega, ATO. And that was started at Virginia Military Institute, VMI. And anyway, we had guns. I had an illegal .410 pistol that belonged to my father, and I had my .30-06 that belonged to me, that I got when I was 13 years old. And we used to go to the dump and shoot rats. And anyway, a fraternity brother of mine by the name of Al Wright, who was a bright guy, that he was always talking about shooting, he had a 270 Winchester, Model 70 Winchester, that, like the one that I had, but it didn't have anywhere near the kick. So I can remember going out, we went out into the fields beyond Middlebury, out to the east, and so we come to this place, we climb over a fence, and there's a dead tree off in the distance.
I'm not sure.
Well, anyway, so I said to Al, I got on the ground, and I said to Al, I said, I'm gonna shoot that branch off of that tree. And I was just peep sights. So pow, the branch comes off the tree. This is about, I would say at least 100 yards off. So he gets on the ground, and so he squeezes the trigger and he flinches. The end of the gun moved about a foot, right? And he looks up at me, and, kind of red-faced, and, you're not supposed to flinch like that. And what had happened was I had put the safety on, and there was a cartridge in the chamber ready to shoot, but the safety was on, right? And oh, jeez. So I went with Al up rabbit hunting with his father. He came from Underhill, which is just behind Stowe, Stowe, Vermont. And his father was, I think he was a heating engineer. At any rate, so we go out and we had a dog, and the snow is I don't know, it's got to have been 1.5 feet deep, almost impossible to hunt, under those conditions. So anyway, we're out there wandering around, and finally it's time for lunch, and Mr. Wright, Al's dad, says, well, we're going to see what kind of a shot you are, something like that. So he takes a spent shotgun shell, and sticks it and puts it in a fork in the tree, and we're off about half again the distance of this room away.
So like 50 feet-ish, or?
Yeah, 50 feet, something like that. And so Al fires a shot, and the thing's still there, and Mr. Wright fires a shot, and the thing's still there. He hands me the gun, I fire a shot, bang, disappears. And I hit the primer. I mean, I actually hit the center of the primer. And he said, "Oh, beginner's luck." Right. So they put the thing back in the fork in the tree, and hands me the gun, and I take it with the other hand. I shot with my right hand to start with, I think, and I shot with my left hand, and he, and I said, baloney. I said, that is beginner's luck. So I put the hammer back, and bang, it disappeared again. And well, anyway, that was that. I still have that K20. It's a K22.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it's down cellar in the safe.
Yeah.
And I had given it to Nathan.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So you were a good shot. So
Oh yeah, I
you
was
started when you started shooting when you were what, 10, 12, 11? Before that?
Oh, I was in. Oh yeah, right. In junior high school, they had a they had a shooting range down in the cellar.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and in high school, I shot. So yeah, I was a good shot. And the thing about, well, I bought that 3006 when I was 13.
Yeah.
Because I'd worked I'd worked mowing lawns in the
Yeah.
summer.
Yeah.
And I bought that 3006 at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And the story there is, so they were not going to sell. This is during the war,
Right.
or just after the war, when firearms were very difficult to come by. So I called up, and Carlisle's was a hardware store downtown Springfield, and up on the second floor is where they had rifles and all that kind of thing. So I called up Carlisle's and I said, "Do you have a 3006, a Model 70 Winchester 3006?" "Oh yeah." "How much?" $106, right? So I know that, and I had the money, because I was a real scrime when it came to saving money like that. So I called up my Uncle Win, and I said, "Oh, would you do me a favor, Uncle Win?" He said, "Yeah, what is it?" And I told him, and he said, "Okay, I'll meet you there, and I have to take the bus from Longmeadow into Springfield and then get down to the store." And I said, "Well, I'll meet you there in
Yeah.
half or 3/4 of an hour," or something like that. And he's there, and we buy this 3006. And he, oh jeez, yeah.
So he needed to buy it because he was an adult.
He needed to buy it. They wouldn't sell it to
Yeah,
a
to a
13-year-old kid.
Right.
And I didn't have in those days you didn't, identification. Today you've got all kinds of identification, but in those days,
Right.
like I said, I was physically big,
Right.
but I wasn't
that big.
I wasn't that big,
Right.
and well, anyway, so.
Now, there was a story that I remember you telling, and I don't remember the details, but it was about Papa was doing something stupid with a gun. You were shooting at something.
No, that was my great grandfather.
Okay, so what was the story?
The story was that he had a single shot 10 gauge shotgun, which we had stolen here, and a Damascus barrel. So he goes out, and there's a hummingbird or a bluebird, I forget which it was, probably a bluebird, on a wire, and he shoots the damn thing. Never shot anything ever after. That was it. He never was able to he never shot a deer or a partridge or a pheasant or anything else afterwards. That was, I think that might be, maybe
That might be
his,
it. I'm not sure that's it, because I seem to remember something else different. So this one though, he shot it and then he just regretted doing it and never shot anything else.
Yeah, well, no,
Or-
he always carried the gun
Mm-hmm.
when he went out hunting, but never was able to shoot anything.
Because
so it was just
it's a bad
Bad-
experience.
bad karma, or
Right.
whatever you want to call it.
Wait, you mean he tried to shoot things?
Yeah.
I see, but never hit anything. That was
No.
like the only thing he ever hit in his whole
Yeah,
life.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was. I don't know. I
The
don't
one
know.
that it was something you were off somewhere, and I think it was Papa and somebody else, and you know, you're terrifying some.
Oh yeah. Well, that was up in New Hampshire, up around Littleton,
Okay.
and so Per Barrett, my father, another guy, and there were four of them, and myself. We met up in Littleton, New Hampshire, and we were going deer hunting. And so fine, we all split up and go our own separate ways. And I'm sitting on a stump having a cigarette, and a deer walks up, and I've got my 30-06 like here with my hand on the trigger, so I don't have to move any, and the deer just walks right by like this, and I went like that, and he never saw it, and I mean he went about 30 feet in the air the other way. It was a doe. So anyway, I sat there for a while and had the cigarette and walked down, and then I see another deer, and I never shot a deer. I just never did. And so then I hear this bang, 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 you know, like that. And I think this is the story.
Maybe.
So I walk out, and here's Barrett and this other guy and my father, and they're shooting at a porcupine up in the, they're shooting at a freaking porcupine up in a tree, and the porcupine's on a branch, and obviously they'd hit the thing, and I said, give me the freaking revolver, you know, and so I killed it.
Yeah.
One shot. And you know, that was just not something that that was senseless.
Yeah.
There wasn't any any point to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that
was the story.
That was the story. Yeah. But the climbing thing, that started when I was really, really young. My mother and father, before I was born, went up to York Beach in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
And after I was born, and that place where they stayed burned down. That kind of thing happened a lot in those days.
Sure.
And so we had this other place that we stayed, and I'd be there, and my mother always went up for 2 weeks, and my father would come up after the first week, and we'd go up to New Hampshire, and you know, stay in a cottage or a motel or whatever you want to call it. In those days, they were cottages in those days, and they still exist, as a matter of fact. And hike.
Yep.
And you know, do Mount Washington. The longest hike we ever took was up the Davis Path, which was 15 miles, and with a pint of water.
Oh man.
Yeah. Oh. Anyway, but that was that. So that was the start of my hiking career, so to speak.
So this would have been when you were a kid, you know.
I was, I was just
whatever.
young.
Yeah.
I mean, I was probably 6 or 7 years old. Maybe a little bit older than that, but not a whole lot older than that. And then in high school, I had a group of guys, and you know, Ray Walk and Dick Willie and a couple of other guys, and we went up there. We went up to climbed Mount Washington twice with those guys, and Ray Walk was, he was one of these really, I used to run with him, and he was a competitive kind of person, and so was I, to be honest about it. And the first year we went up, we stayed past Hermit Lakes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was a little
Yeah, up
a
in the
little place you could camp. So, you know, you can't do it anymore, but
Right.
in those days there was a little place you could camp. And in those days, you carried number 10 cans with fruit and stuff like that. It was unbelievable. And so we go up. We had to go up Tuckerman's over to Lakes and then across to Madison. And we get to Madison Hut, and in those days, the original hut was out in back, and it was stone,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we stayed. With dirt, you know, dirt floor and that kind of stuff. And so, and I still had them. I don't know where they are now, but I had these stoves, you know, or I don't mean pots and pans, you know,
Yeah.
nested. And so we're making spaghetti, and I'll never forget it. Dick Willie breaks his spaghetti out, and I said, "What the hell are you doing that for?" And so anyway, the next day, it's pouring rain. I mean, it's drenched, really, really coming down. Can't see very far in front of you. And the hut master took pity on us and gave us, he must have given us at least 2 or 3 pounds of the white grapes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, raisins. And that, so, God, I haven't thought of that for a long time. So we walk out past, there's a little pond there, and I can't remember the name of it, Sterling Pond or something like that. We walk out there, and we get down, you and I have been on this trail. But at that time they had string that marked where the trail was. So you walk out and then you go across to the Osgood Trail.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was brand new, a brand new trail. So we get out there, we get over to the Osgood Trail, and we go, you know, and go down, and Ray's father was a florist. I mean, he had a greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we had the use of, and Ray was older, and his father let us use the car. It was a station wagon. I'll never forget. Yeah.
Well,
So
I see. Wait a minute. So the car associated, the business car, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we get back to Pinkham, and of course everything's soaked in the car. So we go up, we get up to Rangeley. We're looking for a place to stay, and so we pull into this road. The floorboards on this car were non-existent. So you go through a puddle and the water comes right up through. So we get to this place, and they had cabins. In those days they had cabins. And so the guy said, well, the people left a day early because of the weather. You can have this cabin. So there were 5 of us. And we had sleeping bags and all that kind of stuff. So we said we'll use our sleeping bags and you know. So what we did, of course, everything was soaked.
Yeah.
So there was a stove, and we dried everything on. We must have used up all of his propane. And anyway, yeah, and that was the time we drove up past Rangeley into Canada, and I met my father at the train station, and we stayed over in the Chateau Frontenac.
Oh yes.
And that was there was a guy that my father did work for by the name of Romeo Morrow, who was the manager of a hotel down in Maine. I can't think of it now. So my father goes in, and it's pouring rain. My father goes into the hotel in the Chateau Frontenac and comes back out and said, no room, right? So he said, but I'm gonna go back in. So he calls up Romeo Morrow. He gets him on the phone, and Romeo calls the manager of the Chateau Frontenac, and amazingly enough, we had a room on the Queen's floor, and that's where Mom and I stayed at our honeymoon.
Yeah.
And then we went up, the next day we went up to Laurentide Park fishing. So, but yeah, so, and then when Grandpa built the house, of course that was ideal.
Yeah.
Well,
we hiked the whole.
Oh yeah, we did. I never really did much outside of Mount Washington. Well, I Carter Notch and like that, but I never over Mount Lafayette or any of those places.
Right.
We went. Mom and I took a hike to Lonesome Lake one time, and Lonesome Lake, and you and David and Mom and I went to, what was the place?
It was over. You mean when we were little?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was over. What I remember is seeing
Zealand.
Yeah, Zealand
It was
Falls,
Zealand. Yeah, Zealand.
We went past
Zealand Hut.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that was in the wintertime. Because you guys had skis. I can remember that. David going like hell.
Yeah. I was thinking of a different one, but yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Well, so now to go back, talk a little bit more about college. Middlebury.
Oh.
You had your friend. Because what was
the Middlebury experience was, in my mind, the Middlebury experience was alcohol related.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
In those days, you had fraternities. We had fraternities on campus, and there were a lot of different fraternities. I can remember I was interested in Alpha Tau Omega, and there was Al Wright and I can't think, Doug somebody, I was really I was more than interested in that particular fraternity, NACL. I'll never forget it. They came up and said, "Well, sorry, you blackballed," you know. Jesus, that was a major thing for me. But I wasn't, you know, and
Yeah, so they were giving you a hard time.
they were giving me a hard time. So I got into the fraternity, and I stayed there. Obviously, I didn't stay there freshman year. Sophomore year, I was in the fraternity. And sophomore year, there was a Finnish boy that came over, Mikko Eklund, and he roomed with me second semester. It was a 2-semester system, and Mikko Eklund was a barrel-chested guy. I mean, he was. Have you ever seen a barrel-chested person?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know what you're.
Big person, and physically, and in those days they'd have drinking games. So you know you'd do this kind of stuff, and if you lost, you take a cup of beer. Mikko would, of course, he lost all the time, and he'd take a little cup of beer, down it, reach down, take a pint, take a slug of the pint. He could handle more alcohol than anybody I ever saw. Unbelievable. And he was I think he was an economics major, but he had, so I asked him, I said, "How many languages do you know?" He said, 5. I said, "Really?" I said, did you take English in school?" And he said, "Yeah, but we didn't speak it." So the story was that with these exchange students, or whatever you call them, they would come over here and they go to Washington, D.C., and they would have an indoctrination, an English indoctrination for several weeks.
Yeah.
And then they would come, but Mikko never had that. I can remember meeting him at the train, the Rutland Rocket, we used to call it, the old square wheels, and Mikko gets off the train with this big heavy coat on and a suitcase, and that's it. He doesn't speak zero English, and anyway, but he learned fast. You know, he spoke German, Spanish, Latin, English, and French.
Wow. So Finnish plus all of those.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, plus all of those. And by the time he left, by the time the year was over, he could speak English very well. You know, somebody like that just doesn't. They're bright, you know. But one of the other things that I don't know why I'm thinking of it with relation to him, but so I think it was my freshman year. I'm sure it was my freshman year. I go home one weekend, and there's a tag sale down at some house in town. And so my mother said, "Well, let's go to the tag sale." So we went, and the tag sale is where you put a price on something, you pay. So we go down, and you've got to understand that my parents had not a lot of money to deal with. And here's this coonskin coat, right? I mean, this beautiful coonskin coat. And I said, she said, is there anything you want? And I said, the coonskin, $20. Well, $20 was a lot of money in those days. So we got the coonskin coat, and anyway, went back to school with the coonskin coat, and there was a kid by the name of Olson. We used to call him Ogo. I think his name was Cliff, and he was another drunk. Anyway, I can, but he was short. He couldn't have been more than 5'4", something like that. And I can remember putting the coat on him, turning the collar up. The collar just, you know, you'd never know that Ogo was inside this. Right. The skirt on the coat hit the ground, and right. His sleeve, his arms didn't go out of the sleeve. The collar covered his head. So there was one other thing about Middlebury, that there was a guy by the name of Ron Hanna who was a character, and he drove around in a little yellow MG.
Yeah.
And he would go to local places with old timers and sit around and tell stories, and everybody loved Ron Hanna, but he was another heavy drinker. And I can remember playing cards at what was his name? Well, it doesn't matter. So we're playing cards, and Ron Hanna comes in, and he's in the bag. I mean, he's out of it, right? And he was a card trick guy, and he pulls this card trick out. You know, it's unbelievable, absolutely fantastic. At any rate,
like a card trick, like you have to guess things.
Yeah. You know, and
it's like, here's a, you know, he takes this and puts it back in. And
yeah, that kind of thing. And I mean, it was a complicated trick. And here's the guy half in the bag, or all the way in the bag,
right,
pulling this off. But anyway.
And the reason I thought what you were going to tell when you started that story was, there's a story about there was somebody that had his car dismantled.
Oh,
what was that story?
Ron Siegler or somebody like that. He had a little MG. And the story, I wasn't there at the time, physically there, but they used to go up to the Middlebury Inn and have a few pops if you were 21. So he had this little MG, and the guys picked it up and put it under the tree, or put it on, someplace that wasn't obvious. Anyway, he was the guy that, you got to understand that in those days pistols were, everybody, if you wanted one, you had one. Right. And Ron, and it was quick draw, right? Yeah. And so Ron has this pistol, a Harrington Richardson 9-shot pistol, in a holster on his belt, and he cocks the freaking handle, cocks the hammer, right, and tries to do a quick draw and shoots himself in the foot.
Now, is this a student, this guy, or he was?
Oh yeah. It was a student. Yeah, we used to call him Toolie the Wedge. The simplest tool known to man. Anyway, so to continue on, so it came time senior year came time to deal with the service. And in those days, there was a draft. So either you joined the service, or you went home and waited for your notice to show up for the Army. So, and they had an ROTC at school, which I never was involved with, an Army ROTC. And I wasn't interested in being in the Army particularly. So neither was I particularly interested in being an enlisted person. So I came home and I went to the Army recruiting station and said, I'd like to be an officer. Well, you have to sign up for 3 years and there's no guarantee. Went to the Air Force. I'd like to be a pilot. 4 years, no guarantee. So then I go back to school, and I got to talking to somebody, and somebody said, "Well, you want to try the Navy, because that you have to fill out a whole raft of I got a sheaf of forms like that." And so I filled them out, I sent them in, and Beckwith went with me, because he did the same thing. He was going to Babson.
Yeah. So you guys went together to the Navy?
Went together to the Fargo building
Okay.
in Boston. That's where all that took place. And so when you went in there, you took a physical, you had a physical, and then they gave you a mental test, and either you passed or you didn't pass. And Beckwith didn't pass because he had had rheumatic fever when he was a kid. And I passed. So, okay, so next thing you do, you go into the recruiting officer, and he says, okay, you passed, here's the deal. You sign up for 3 years, 3 years active duty, 4 years, 4 months officers candidate school, and 3 years reserve.
This is for the Navy here.
This is
right?
for
So
the Navy.
you already dealt with the Army and the Air Force.
Yeah, I didn't do anything with them. So I said, that sounds good to me. So I signed in the dotted line. And then they asked me, when do you want to start? Right? So I'm saying, I told the guy up front, I said, well, I'd like to take the summer off. How about November? So, okay. So I was class 25 at Officers Candidate School, back in the olden days. That really was in the olden days. And so, so that's how that all began. And then I was in, that's where I met Al Holfer.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I graduated from Officers Candidate School, and then the next step is training command. So I was in NAS Jacksonville, Florida, for 2 months, 2 or 3 months, I forget which. And then I was transferred to Glenview Naval Air Station, outside of Chicago, outside of Evanston, Illinois, and I was there I was actually up there for something like 6 months, because I got transferred up there. School didn't begin for a couple of months, or I couldn't, get into but that Naval Air Station no longer exists. But remember they had B-24s, in the Second World War, B-24s on base.
Yeah.
And at any rate, so, and then from there, I went to Glencoe, Georgia. I bought the Jaguar when I was in Chicago, in the area. And went to Glencoe, Georgia, and that's where I had the wreck. And spent, 3 months in a hospital down in NAS Jacksonville. And then, the Bugatti story.
I don't remember this one.
So, one of the guys that was at Officers Candidate School down in the training command was well-to-do, and he had an automobile, and we drove out to Mayport, where the Saratoga was birthed, and another carrier, I forget what the other carrier was, but at any rate, on the way out there, we go by this Bugatti, coupe Bugatti.
Yeah.
And so on the way, so we go out to Mayport and take a look at the carriers and all. On the way back, I said to Bill, stop here. I want to talk. I want to take a look at this car. So we stopped, and this guy came out who owned the car, and I said, do you mind showing me the car? He opens up the hood, brand new, straight 8 engine in there. I mean, it was immaculate. So he's telling us stories about that car today cost you $1 million, or over $1 million. So he told us the story about how he got it and all that kind of thing. But anyway.
I never heard that one. That's
You never,
interesting. I don't
yeah,
think so.
yeah,
Is that a
that,
classic car?
well, that was, oh yeah, it was a real class. I mean, the wheels were like,
Mhm.
I think they were 21-inch wheels, semi-elliptical springs on the back, and he said, I had this thing going 125 miles an hour, and stamped on the brakes just to see what would happen. Stopped. No, none of this,
Right.
anything,
Right.
And the other story that he told was, he said, when I got this car, Bugatti is French, as opposed to Italian.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, Bugattis, they were made in France. So, he was in the army, and he paid $5,000 for this car, which was a lot of money in those days. I mean, a lot of money. A brand new Porsche would cost you $3,000.
Right.
Anyway, so he gets this car, and he wants to have it checked out, right? So he goes to a Bugatti garage, and he says, I want you to, go over this car to make sure that everything is cool and groovy. So the guy says, well, he says, maybe you better take a walk. And the guy says, well, why? He says, well, he said, the transmission on this car is like this big, and it's huge. And he said, the guy that owned the company said, well, he said, we gotta run it through the gears. And he said, there's no synchro mesh in this car. And he said, you're gonna think the thing is gonna blow up on you. So, anyway, he did that and got the car back. But,
So now so at this time, you're down in Georgia, in Glencoe, and
no, I was
No, back to
actually, it was the time frame would be when I went from Newport down to NAS Jacksonville for training.
Okay.
Uh,
That time.
that was at that point in
Okay.
time.
And so then you went to Evanston.
So we went to
Yeah.
Evanston
Back.
after that,
Yeah.
and then went down to Glencoe, Georgia.
And then when were your cruises? When were the?
Okay, the cruises. So at any rate, the story there is I was transferred up to Quonset Point.
Yeah.
Okay, and at the time that I went to Quonset Point, the USS Lady was, which is a straight deck carrier,
Yeah.
was berthed at Quonset.
Okay.
So I was at Quonset at that time. The first cruise that I went on was on the Lady,
Okay.
and there was the guy that was in charge of what we would have would be 4 planes and a detachment of officers and enlisted men on the carrier, and so Lieutenant Commander Burnham was the officer in charge, and being a straight deck carrier, you landed, and there were I think there were 8 wires that you know the hook would pick up,
Yeah.
or hopefully pick up, and then they had a net up here.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. And it's a wooden deck carrier,
Okay.
wooden deck carrier. And we landed. So I went up with Burnham, Mr. Burnham, and we landed. And on the way down, he says, "When I tell you to get out," he says, "I want you to get out and get in the catwalk right now." He said, "Don't wait. Don't hesitate." So we land, I open the cockpit up, and I'm out on the wing and into the catwalk. And so we get into the ready room, and I said, "Well, what was that all about?" And he said, planes are landing right behind us. And if somebody misses the wires and goes over the net, they're in your face right now.
Right. Okay. Keep going.
So anyway, after that,
Where was that cruise to? Was that just a local?
oh yeah, it was just off the coast. Yeah, it was just a Mickey Mouse kind of cruise. And then after that, the next cruise that I went on was the North Atlantic cruise, and that's where I met Roger Smith. He's the guy that he's the guy.
Right. The guy now that kind of coordinates.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. All the people that were in the squadron.
Yeah.
And Roger must be 83, 84, 85, somewhere along in there. And the officer in charge was a guy by the name of Boyle, and I don't remember the executive officers, but that was the time I grew a mustache. And in those days, that was a no-no. That was not done. So Weibel, the executive officer, was a guy by the name of Weibel. You know, no balls at all. That guy. And so Boyle tells Weibel to tell me to shave off the mustache, or I don't go on liberty. Weibel tells Roger to tell me to shave off because he didn't want to do it, you know. And Roger at the time was a lieutenant, which is a two bar. And so Roger told me to shave off my mustache, which I did because I wanted to go on liberty. and anyway, that was the, and I think you've heard this story. So we're out and we've got the New Jersey and another battleship, the Iowa, and the New Jersey and the Iowa were with us. So a group of us are out in the catwalk, and you're taught about closing, relative position.
Yeah.
So we're in the catwalk, and I look up forward and I see this silhouette, and I'm thinking it's a battleship, but it isn't a battleship. It ends up being a heavy cruiser, which is a big ship. I mean, it's a 30,000 ton ship. So I'm watching it, and we're closing on this, getting closer and closer. Finally, a bunch of us went to the port side, to the left-hand side catwalk, to see what's going on. And so we're like this, and we're closing. I could have thrown a baseball and hit this ship. So I get up on the flight deck, and I'm running toward the tower. Boom, 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 boom. That's a signal, an emergency signal. So anyway, next day we're in the wardroom, and the guy, there was an officer who was in this Combat Information Center, which is the CIC, what we call the CIC, where they have all the radar and stuff like that. And he said, that's the closest this captain ever came to being an insurance salesman. And he said, when we're on a closing course, the captain of the ship is informed every 30 seconds. Range and bearing, range and bearing, range and bearing. Every 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And the story was that the captain of the heavy cruiser had one less number, rank number, than the captain of the carrier.
Yeah.
They were probably classmates,
Right.
at the Naval Academy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, right, read between the lines. Oh, jeez.
Wow. Wow. Well, so on that cruise, I remember some stories that you've told, and I think on that cruise there was some story about you were near Norway, and you were going somewhere in the.
Oh yeah,
what was that story? Tell us that story.
Well, that was the pilot was Jack Davidson, and we're flying off the coast of Norway, and I think this is the story, and all of a sudden there are these giant rocks off the coast, and we're aimed right at one, and at any rate, obviously we never hit it, but.
Well, but then there was one where the gas, it was like you needed to switch, and you were going over, and you lost altitude, and you.
Well, this was in the Mediterranean.
That was okay.
The pilot there was Bruce Bothwell, who's passed away since. But yeah, we were over in the Mediterranean, and we were doing things we shouldn't do, and it was the island of Crete. And we were flying at 600 feet, and I'm sitting in the back.
600 or 6,000?
600.
600. So
600
low.
feet.
Yeah.
Watching the White Houses go by, and all of a sudden I look at my radar screen, and I always put down when the pilot would always tell us when they went on the tip tank.
Right.
So I looked at this, and I knew how long it took. You know, it was like 40 minutes on the tip tank. So I hit the intercom and I said, "Bruce, tip tank." You know, he never swore, but he swore he did then. And so he started the plane up like that. We got to 1,200 feet, and he switched to main. He switched onto the main tank. The plane sank 600 feet. So the engine caught at 600 feet. And so if I hadn't noticed this like that,
Right.
we would have been in the drink.
Yeah.
And would have been court-martialed and all the rest.
Right. Right.
The one other story was the commander, the officer in charge of our squadron detachment was Lieutenant Commander Goodall. So we were on an exercise off of Greece in the Peloponnesian Islands up there. And the exercise was done even before we got there. They they found the fleet and all this kind of thing. So we're on our way back to the carrier, and Goodall says, he said, "Would you mind flying this for a minute?" And he says, "I gotta take a nap." So I'm flying, I'm reaching over in front of him like that with a stick, and so we were coming along, and I said, you know, he said, you'll see the trail of the carrier, right? So I said, fine. So we're going along, and he's napping and flying along, and he said, just keep on this course. So I keep on the course, and we get to the
wake.
the wake pathway, so to speak. And I said, which way do we go? And he says, so go to the left. He says, oh God. Yeah. And then one other time I was up with him, he was cool. I mean, he was a good pilot. So the plane had been in for repairs. So we could take off from the main deck as opposed to the cant deck, which was a catapult deal.
Right.
So we could take off from the main deck. So we got off the main deck, and it was always one of these things. So we take off. He gives it the gun. We go up. We get off. He's looking out. The cockpit's open. He's looking out like this, and oil all over the freaking windshield.
Yeah.
Right. So I hit the intercom and I said, Mr. Goodall, I said, better check the windscreen. I said, we've got oil all over. Well, it was supposed to be fixed. That was part of the deal. So he called back and called the carrier and said emergency landing, so we landed. But one of the other stories was, I'm pretty sure I've told you this. Ed Furdak was the pilot, and I never cared to fly with Ed because he wasn't the best pilot in my estimation. And so we're coming around. We've been on a 4-hour hop off the coast of Italy, around Sardinia. So we come around and we get at the 180, which means that we've got to go around like this and land. get at the 180, and Ed calls, and I'm sitting in the back. Ed calls up, and you had to get a fuel state, 180 fuel state. So he calls up the carrier, 180 fuel state, 500 pounds. And I said, you gotta call him up and tell him you got an emergency fuel state landing, or I'm getting out of here, right? Period. So he called back, and emergency fuel state landing, brings us around, gets the meatball, lands the plane, engine stopped. Jesus, Happy New Year.
Yeah. So that was, obviously that was like not much fuel.
Oh, yeah, I mean.
What did you guys go up with? 30,000 pounds? I mean, how?
Well,
what was that? I mean,
probably, more than likely we had two tip. It was a 4-hour hop. We had 2 tip tanks and the main, I forget, I don't know how many gallons, but 500 pounds, that was the deal. With that plane, with that airplane, 500 pounds was like running on fumes.
Right.
And because when you gassed it to come around to land,
right.
you used up. That's what happened to Roger.
What happened to him?
Well, so Roger. This is on a shakedown or a cruise off the coast.
Yeah.
And of Florida, and so Roger takes off, and there's a guy who was in charge of scheduling by the name of Asher Stutman, and another guy by the name of Ruby, who was Asher was in the rear seat, and you can't see anything, I mean, at all. And Ruby's up here. So the story is that a plane crashed on the deck and got a strut stuck in the catapult, and they couldn't get it out. What they call Tilly, which was a crane kind of thing, was somewhere other than it should be. So instead of telling Roger to dog and conserve, which means you climb to altitude and you just buzz around, and you don't use up much fuel.
Right.
He kept on coming in for a landing.
Yeah.
And so he's sucking up fuel like mad.
Yeah.
So he gets to a point where he has to ditch the plane. So that's what he does. He ditches the plane. There in those days there was a destroyer, a plane guard destroyer, off ahead of the carrier and behind the carrier, and they picked him up. Mm-hmm. And so so at any rate, Asher Stutman, after he was a Jewish kid and dark complexioned, and I'll never forget, because they did a breacher's boy from the destroyer, and Asher was white. I mean, he was dark complexioned, but he was white when they came, because they dipped him into the water, and all that kind of stuff. And he came back, and he'd just gotten engaged. Took his wings off, said, "See you later." That's the end of my flying career. So
Now, was that the end of Roger's flying career?
That was the end of Roger's flying. Yeah. So that went on. So Roger, you have a file in the Navy, and most of the time you get a 4.0 for a fitness report. Mm-hmm. Okay. Roger got Roger got a pilot error, end of career, and he would have been a career person. He was a Brown graduate, and so he left. He just got out of the Navy.
Yeah.
And went to medical school, went to Tufts Medical School, and then he's out in Corvallis, Oregon now. Yeah. And he's been a medical doctor ever since. And he's still associated with flying kind of thing, and he gives guys their annual medical exam and all that kind of stuff.
Well, okay, so any other top 2 or 3 stories about the Navy?
Well, yeah, the other story, we're in Barcelona, and we're there with the fleet in the Mediterranean, and so we had to execute what they call a sortie, and the sortie basically is, the purpose of the sortie is to evade submarines.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the word comes down, they need a volunteer to take off at anchor. So yours truly, a volunteer, that was neat, right? So we get up and we get up on the flight deck, and they catapult us off. I forget what speed, it doesn't matter. We flew at 145 knots, but they didn't. We could maintain altitude at 100. So. So we did we executed the sortie. We went up and flew around, and as a communications link. And next thing we know, the Nautilus pulls up behind us and said, "You're dead." Oh, jeez. Yeah. That was.
Oops.
Yeah. That was a little discouraging, to say the least.
So pulled up behind you, meaning your plane, or the Saratoga?
The Saratoga.
The Saratoga.
Yeah, the Saratoga. Comes up almost directly.
So you were supposed to see this.
Well,
or somebody was supposed to see it.
Yeah, somebody was supposed to. Somebody was supposed to see it.
Oops. And then one other thing that I remember was something about you in Lebanon and a rooster tail or something behind the ship. You guys got called up to go. There was some international incident.
Oh, well, that was the Beirut crisis.
Okay.
And when I was over in the Mediterranean, Hofer was over in the Mediterranean as well, and he was UDT, underwater demolition. And at any rate, that was an uncomfortable. That was really an uncomfortable time. Everybody was given a blood shit. You carried a revolver with you and all that kind of stuff. And you were given, coins and gold coins and stuff like that to trade for your freedom, basically. And they put atomic bombs in the planes, and not a good time. And what happened was a lot of the fighter planes, AD, the straight AD planes, would fly over Beirut, and these guys with these machine guns they get holes in the plane. And anyway, and that was when I was called back to sitting in the wardroom, and I think it was Bill Ragsdale came in and said to me, he says, "You got orders." I said, "What do you mean? It's a communication assignment." Captain of the squadron's calling you back to Quonset. So, so that, you know, they were legitimate. They were on flimsy. They'd come in by what we called a COD. It was an S2F plane. And they had one at that museum that we went to.
Yeah.
So next day I packed my bags and see you later. 6 months. The cruise was a 9-month cruise. And so I left. And 57 hours later I was in the United States.
Yeah.
Went from Beirut to Adana, Turkey, to Frankfurt, Germany, to Reykjavik, Iceland, to, I don't know, some Air Force base in
Maine or something?
No, it was in New York or New Jersey. And I had a revolver, the K-22 revolver. And I'll never forget it. Because of course, I was in uniform, and I had this revolver in my what they call the B4 bag, and I was just, you know, I had to go through customs, and I was afraid that they were going to find this revolver in my bag, and I never said a word. They did.
Right.
In those days, they didn't have all the radar, all
Yeah,
all the
X-ray
scanning stuff.
Yeah. So, okay. So around this time was when you were going with Mom, right?
Well, yeah, that's another part of the story. So I get back, and Mom is teaching, or is going to Harvard School up in Newton. She's taking care of some kids of a family and this guy's at Harvard. I think he's an astrophysicist. I think his name was Schiller. But at any rate, so you know, we've communicated all along, and I get up there and I'm waiting for Mom. That was a non-experience. It was, you know, see you later kind of thing. So that was the end of that relationship at the time. And at that time.
Well, so hang on a second though.
Yeah.
You go up to see Mom. She's just not there.
She's
Or-
there, but she doesn't want to have anything to do with me.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, that's
Okay.
pretty much what it boils down to. So at that time, the guys that I grew up with, Barry and Charlie and
Yep.
you know, Frankie and some of the others, always played poker once a month. So I'm up home, and we're and you have to understand, I met Mom at Charlie Drummy and
Yeah.
Dell's wedding.
Right.
That, you know. So we're at Charlie's house, and we're playing darts down cellar, and Dell comes down and says, maybe you should get in contact with Charlotte. I said, oh, that's cool. You know. So anyway, that's what we did. That's what I did. And I forget how I got a hold of her, but I did. But I got a hold of her.
So was she still at Harvard at this point, or she was?
No. She was.
She was. Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of beginning of the beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
That's fun, right? So you basically this was initially it was an on and off thing.
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, Mom says that Mom said that Grandma said and Ralph said, you know, you got a good thing going here. Maybe you better take advantage of it.
Right,
And of course I was still drinking then,
right,
and not only drinking but smoking,
right,
and that was a pretty major issue.
right.
The smoking particularly was a major issue.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's about the side of it.
Yeah, and then okay, so you get back together with Mom. You guys get married.
Yeah.
So then you have. So what'd you do for your, you know? So you worked in your first job
Well,
after the Navy was Mass
Mass
Mutual?
Mutual.
Okay.
I worked at the Mass Mutual for a year and a half,
Yep.
and then Mars, who graduated from Brown, said there's an opening for a job at the computer laboratory at Brown.
Mm-hmm.
So I applied for that, and I got that job. So I worked there for a year and a half, and Bob Halkyard, who
Yeah.
was Mom's cousin, basically, said he was an IBM salesman,
Mm-hmm.
and he said there's a job opportunity at Automobile Mutual.
Okay.
So I went for an interview with the president
Mm-hmm.
of Automobile Mutual, Mr. Abel, and got the job, and for a substantially larger sum of money. And what they wanted me to do was they were going to get a 1401
Mm-hmm.
computer,
IBM.
and yeah, IBM. That was pretty much it in those days.
Yeah.
Honeywell, IBM, RCA, and we want to use it as a printer. So I got to thinking about it, and I said, well, if you're going to do this, why not write the policies and do the whole thing?
Right.
So that's what
Yeah.
that's what we did, and so you know, so to start with there were I think 5 of us, and then
Hang on a second. Okay.
so basically we set up you know, the guys that worked for me, the 5 guys that worked for me, wrote the programs for doing the policies, the automobile policies. And then at that time the Beatles were around.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I think that, I don't know whether you were born at that time. Well, it doesn't matter. I think no, you were born at that time, and so was Nathan.
Or David, you mean?
Yeah,
Nathan was later, right? Or-
Well, Nathan was a little bit later. But one of the things that I remember about that experience was 2 things. One, they had a modification to the 14. We got a 1410, IBM 1410, and they had some modifications that would speed it up by a lot.
Yep.
You know, not a lot today, but a lot in those days. And the guys came down, and they had one guy who was reading instructions, and yeah,
Right.
I mean they were in the guts of this machine, and they were welding or they were soldering
Yeah.
wires
Yeah.
between one place and another,
Wow.
and everything worked fine.
Yeah.
And then after that machine, we got a 360, IBM 360. What was it? A 360 Model 40, 128K memory, and and uh, and there was a guy by the name of worked for IBM. No, did he work for IBM? Yeah, I guess he did work for IBM. Roger Jetty, and he was a character, but he was brilliant. I mean, he was really sharp, and he taught me how to do compilations for the operating system. We had a deck of cards, Andrew, that was like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, a whole stack
Right.
of cards, and I got to the point where I could lift up the deck and pull out a control card or change a control card. You know, that's how it got. So we had that machine, and we operated that machine for as long as I was there, and I left in 1967. And one of the things that I remember was at that time IBM was developing what they call the Big Oz, and almost all the operating systems today are based on that work. And so we were out in Poughkeepsie, where IBM, every other building was IBM, and we were, and I had a tape with the operating system and the programs on it, but the tape needed to be transferred to a disk drive. So, and we were having some problems at this facility that we were at, and so I had to take and transfer the tape to a disk, and 2311 disk. And so we said to the guy that was in charge of the facility that we were at that we needed to do this, and he said, no, this is 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Okay. So he said, well, you go down here, and you'll see this building, and there's a circular drive, and the Milk and Donuts man comes at about 2:30. Okay. And he said, just walk in behind him. So sure enough, we parked the car, and there's a salesman and a systems engineer. I forget who they were. Milk and Donuts truck pulls up. He gets in, and we walk in right behind him, right? So, and this is a huge building. We walk down this corridor, and the guy, you know, bearded people on in their offices on the left hand. They had 2 a.m. or 2:30. So we go in, we go around the corner, then we go around. There's a big sign on his door, no admittance. Right? Bullshit. You know. So we walk in, and there's a central place that's about as big as this room, and there's a couple of guys in there. So we walk up, and they had all of the experimental machines in there, IBM machines. And so the guy says, you guys IBM? I'm IBM. I'm IBM. I'm not IBM. Right, and I have a briefcase. So anyway, we shoot this shit for a while, And finally they said, well, we've got to have this done, you know.
Yeah.
And so where's a machine that we can do this with? And he said, over here, you go over in this corner, there's a machine, and they've got a tape drive like the one that you read, and they've got a disk drive. So I take my bag, and I don't know if I still have the bag, but at any rate, so I go over there, and here's a kid running the machine. So I told him what the deal was, and you know, that this guy had said to come over there. So he said, so he's kind of looking at me, and so I go over to the tape drive, and what you had to do was you had to open up the door, and there was a switch inside that you had to flip for it to work properly. So I opened the door up, and this kid's standing there. He didn't know what the hell to make of it. And I turned it, I flipped the switch, and I had a disc, and I put the disc on the drive, and put the tape on, and everything was cool and groovy. But that was a real experience.
Wow. So sorry, keep going.
No, that's, you know, that's the end of that story.
Well, one of the stories I remember you told was, it was a time when it was probably when you were writing the system, you know, and I remember because it sounded like you went down to New York a fair amount.
Yeah, we did.
To do this stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember it was something about you were testing some programs, and you had a bunch of cases, and it was like this facility was so booked up that it was like once you ran into the first error, you were done. Right? So
Yeah.
What was that?
Well, that was when we'd written all of the programs, and like you say, it was a Time Life building in New York City that IBM had. I don't know whether it was the bottom floor or sub-basement or whatever it was, and they had all of the machines that we needed in there, tape drives and stuff like that. And so all the guys that worked for me were there. My boss was there, Joe Boylan. And so we go in, and this is late at night, and I said, okay, just be quiet. I'm going to tell you what to do. So I think this is the story. So, you know, I handed each guy a tape, and I said, okay, this is, you got to mount these. I told him, I told him what to do, basically. And you know, Joe Boylan was over here. He didn't know what was going on. And so we ran the test, I mean, without a flaw, without a hitch, which was cool, and that was that.
Yeah.
But that I think that was.
I think so.
Yeah,
so it just went poof, poof, poof.
But they all did exactly what I told them to do.
Right.
There was no. You know, we had a console, and you know, somebody was at the console, and I was just directing the whole operation at the time. And then, so that was, I think that was, we were still in the back room. The back room was where at Automobile Mutual they stored all the cards. In those days they had cards, and they were tabulating machines.
Right.
You know, that's how they did the payroll. And after that, we moved to an office up in the front part of the building, which would be toward toward the riverside. And I had a corner office, and I had 15 people working for me. And anyway, we were involved with homeowners stuff at the time, and I had some really sharp people, really good people. One other story that I'm pretty sure I told you was there was a guy by the name of Bill Riley, and he was good. He and not only good, but he was interested, which counts for a lot. And he was always, and he wasn't part of the group, and he was always asking me for manuals and stuff like that. And, well, give me a program to do and that kind of thing. So he ended up being in the group, and we're up in Mr. Abel's office because he reviewed all of the salaries. And my boss was there, and this is, I don't know how many times I've been up, but a couple of times probably. So we're going over, and Joe Boylan was literally afraid of Mr. Abel. I always got along with Mr. Abel very well. And so come to Bill Riley, and he says, well, $600. That was a decent raise in those days. And I said, Mr. Abel, I said, this guy should be making what the others are making. And it turned out to be a $3,000 raise. And Joe Boylan almost fell off his chair. And so Mr. Abel says, okay, that's, I can see your reasoning there. So he gave Bill a $3,000 raise to bring him, because the kid was doing the work that people were making that kind of money, and so.
Did you ever find out what Riley thought of that?
He came up and said thanks. Yeah, he did. He left shortly after. Well, in those days, there was a lot of competition for, people were going where people were offering more money, and the same thing was true at Mass Mutual. Guys would be offered $3,000 more a year, and the thing about that was that these jobs were in New York City, and
it cost a lot more to live.
Yeah, it cost a lot more to live. So it's, but that was good stuff. And then after that, when I left, I was a little. To be honest with you, I was a little bit disillusioned with my status there, because Joe Boylan was my boss, and he just didn't know shit from Shinola about computers. Period. He just didn't.
Yeah.
And I figured that I should be a vice president at that time, either along the line or potential. So at that time, Grandpa had moved down to Bristol, to Reichel in Bristol, and Ted Vetterline, who was another alcoholic, wanted me to come down there.
Yeah.
So
So
went up and saw Mr. Abel and told him, and Bill Jr. who was the vice president at the time, said, did Joe Boylan have anything to, you know, to do with this? And I said, well, you know, not really, but next thing I know, Joe Boylan's gone. I mean, he was gone when I went downstairs.
Wow.
So we, you know, and so that was the end of
That's
his,
interesting.
the end of,
Yeah.
well, the story with Joe Boylan was, he was the guy, he worked for IBM, and he was the guy that set up all the tabulating machines back
Yeah.
when, and
Before the computers really were.
before the computers, and that's how they ran the payroll.
Yeah.
They paid in cash.
Yeah.
You got an envelope every month,
Yeah.
and that was cash to the penny.
Right.
And he was the guy that set all that up.
Yeah.
And when the guy that came down, who was responsible for calculating all that area was shut off.
Yeah.
You couldn't go in there, and they had a hood over the freaking machine and
Yeah.
and everything. So anyway, so I went down to work for Grandpa in 1967. Was it 67? I think it was 1967, somewhere around there. And there's a hummingbird. And I worked down there I worked there for 25 years. And at first, we had Florence St. Ange came to work for me, and then, what's her name? There was another girl, with a key punch operator that worked for me. But Florence saved my bacon a lot of times, because she knew how to operate the sorters and the collators and all that. So we had a 1401, which was a big downgrade.
Right.
But you know, I was still drinking at that time. And, but I was good at what I did. When it came to programming, we eventually got a set of programs and got a VAX, a 360 or VAX. No, MFCM.
Yeah.
The multi-function card masher. I programmed that. I programmed that sucker. They had print. They had a 132 character print thing. Well, I used up 50 characters of that for instructions. That's how that worked. And then we got the VAX, and by the time I left, the VAX was the machine that was there, and Ralph came to work for me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Ralph Jr.
Yeah, young Ralph, and. So, and my feeling is that they never would have sold the company for as much as they did if it hadn't been for the computer setup. Period.
Because, so what did the computers do for the?
We did everything. We general ledger, invoicing.
So basically, all the accounting.
All the accounting. Yeah. The only thing that we didn't have The only thing we didn't have on there was the control, the shop control.
Right. You mean controlling the machines?
Yeah.
Yeah, like computer controlled machines.
Yeah, yeah. And that was done by another guy down in the Carbide area.
Right.
So, and then from there, I was out of work for, 3 years. And the deal was that the people that bought the people that bought the company paid interest on the balance, and we got income from that.
Right.
And then after that ran out, Ralph and Ned got major dollars out of it. Prudy got major dollars out of it. Mom got a reduced amount of money out of it. But so once that ran out, then I was looking for a job. So that's when I went to what do they call it? Workman's. Well, anyway, that was when I took the netwear course up in Providence.
Yeah.
And so I took that. I had an apprenticeship through them. This is Roger Williams in Providence. Through them, I had an apprenticeship at Textron for 3 or 4 months, something like that. And I knew nothing about PCs or
Right.
anything like that. So then that was over, and I applied for a job. Oh, that goddamn squirrel.
Brief pause.
So then I got the. I had applied for a job up in Attleboro and got turned down. And once this course was over, I applied again and was accepted. And the guy the Scott Mortica was the guy that got the job that I applied for originally.
Yeah.
And so I went to work up there, and they had a real, bastard
Disaster,
situation.
yeah.
And Tom Dowling was the guy that was in charge, and he was a Vietnam veteran, anyway, he ended up quitting. Scott Matika left, so I was in charge of the whole, three servers, another server in the police department, another server in the fire department. What's the park up there? Well, anyway, I used to bring you there. Cape Ron Park.
Oh, okay.
Cape Ron Park. And in essence, I had responsibility for something like 130 terminals,
Right.
along with all the servers, which was, and this was in Unix,
Right.
which I had to learn.
Right.
And so anyway, and they were good to me up there. There was a fellow who was the mayor's assistant, Jim Kern was his name, and Admiral Zumwalt was his father was an admiral, a vice admiral in the Navy, and Admiral Zumwalt pinned his his Eagle, not what his Eagle Scout
Oh,
badge.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, that was that.
And you were in Attleboro for how long?
I was in Attleboro for like 4 years.
Okay.
I retired in 1999. You know, that was it. I honestly don't know what happened up there since.
Right.
But during the time that I was out of work, on living on interest from that loan, from that sellout, was when I started the woodworking.
Yeah. So, like, for me, the woodworking kind of totally came out of the blue when you started doing that. You know,
Oh,
I
yeah,
was kind
it
of
did.
like, what the fuck?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
How come? Like, did you ever, before you started that, did you ever think, hey, you know?
No.
So you
no,
just
I never
decided to do it.
I had a couple of machines. I had a drill press, a bench drill press. I had a little saw, and I had a sander, a belt sander.
Yeah.
And that was it.
And
Yeah.
so you used those previously just to kind of whatever fix things up, make small things.
Yeah, right. So
I mean, I do remember when I was in 6th grade, we had to do a project, and I remember you helping me make a model of the monitor. Do you remember that at all?
no.
It was, and of course you did the whole thing, basically.
Right.
And it was nice. It was really, you know, gorgeous. But, you know, I mean, it's just kind of, it's interesting to me to kind of find out, like what was it? You just kind of, when they were like, well, it'd be neat to make a box, or did you do it for...
Well, no. What happened was, so, you know, I've been fishing.
Right.
I mean, a
Right,
lot.
long time.
For a long time. And there's a cabinet down cellar that I don't know who built it. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, I don't think it was my grandfather, it was probably my great-grandfather. And it had 3 drawers in it. And so I'm looking at that, and I've got that down cellar right now. And so I said, well, you know, maybe I could build a fly box or something like that. So that's what I did. The first thing that I did, you have that little 3 drawers with the wing.
Yep.
So I got the tools. I had a bench. I had a lathe bench. I got the lead jig at that time, and I had a router.
Yeah.
So I got some drill bits to make that leaf.
Mm-hmm.
That leaf. That's a special series of bits that you need for that.
Yeah.
And then some hinges, the boot. And that's when I got a hold of started to buy things from Whitechapel.
Okay.
And they give me 25% discount, although they you know, it doesn't amount to that much, because anyway, so I did that, and then I made a few of those, and I said, well, you know, I'm going to start a company, right? So I did that, and it's Anglers Cabins Limited, and I was encouraged to do that by I sent some pictures into Fly Fishing Magazine, I think, and they did a write-up,
Mm-hmm.
which was fine. And so I got all kinds of responses. I mean, you know, probably a couple of thousand
Yeah.
people. You know, no one's interested, but they're interested in getting a brochure and all that kind of stuff. So that went on for a while, and I gave one to Ronnie Boss has one, and that was a gift to.
This is kind of, when you say one, you mean like a kind of standard box that you made?
Yeah, standard box.
For
Yeah. And the way there are 4 drawers, a leaf, and then in the back you can hang a vest, you know, a computer fly vest. So Ronnie Boss has one of those that I gave to Lincoln for a silent auction, and he paid $600 for that. One guy from Chicago, I sold a cherry box to,
Yeah.
and that was it.
Right.
Nobody else. And so, and then what happened was a guy by the name of Jacob Leeson sent me a letter saying that he wanted me to design a box, a fly box for him, and he had this many reels and this, and he had you know, he wanted a place for waders, and he wanted a place for his 40 millimeter pistol, and
Right.
you know, all of that. He smoked and all of that. So I did that. I drew up a design for him, and you've got a box like that at home. That Bubinga wood box that I made for you.
Yeah.
So so I made that box, and you know, it wasn't a cheap box. He gave me $600 for it.
Yeah.
But
Didn't even probably cover the cost.
well, yeah, it did.
All right.
But
not much more.
you know, and I made it so that there were slots for fly boxes, and you know, you pull a little tab out, and in the back there was an area for
Secret place.
a secret place for his pistol, and then on the side I got some driftwood, and I made a rack for his pipe, and you know, all of that kind of thing. And then in the top I had it set up so that he could put 4 reels. He had 4 reels, and the story there was that I'd gone through all of this work, and I had to make something to hold the flap like this, and it was a jury rig kind of deal. And there's a spring in there. So there's a spring-loaded things that, when you put the top down, the rod goes into the flap.
Yep.
Okay. So I do this, but I have to chisel out a place for the thing to go down inside.
Yep.
So I've got the piece out, and I start to chisel, and all of a sudden I realize that I'm on the wrong side. So that's when I decided, well, I'm not going to redo this, you know. That's when I made the, you know, the thing that goes across.
Yeah.
So to cover up.
Yeah.
To cover up, and I sanded it down so that you'd never notice, and that I made that, feathered that thing across the front.
Yeah.
That's how that all happened.
Okay, okay.
But Jacob, and he was good. I mean, he paid me up front, and so his pitch was, when I go fishing, I want people. I've got this kind of a vehicle, you know, an SUV or something like that. And he says, I want people to look at that and say, where did you get that?
Right, right.
And you know, I suspect that he did that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you know, from there, I didn't do any more about the business. I just canceled that.
Yeah.
Essentially, I've still got cards, but business cards. But from there, I've made
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff.
I mean, and you've got, I mean, just for, right, you've got your book with all your pictures,
Yeah,
right? I
Yeah.
mean, how many items have you made at this point? I mean, over 100.
oh yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
couple
yeah.
hundred,
Yeah,
something.
oh,
I mean,
yeah, at least. You know, the marble towers I've made 3 of the kind that I made for
the box
Rockfield,
kind, yeah.
the box kind, 1 of the, you know, the tower with the bell on the top, and 6 or 8 of the ones that it's
Right, the kind of, the almost cone-like ones.
yeah,
that-
right,
with the-
right,
yeah.
the dining room, and then the clock, and you know, the
Well, just for us.
coffee
right.
table for you, and
Lots of stuff. End table for the couch, end table for the bed.
right.
My Bubinga wood box, Chris's jewelry box, Chris's
Right.
jewelry box that goes on the wall.
Right.
I
yeah.
mean,
Oh yeah, there's
right. Nathan's tiger maple secretary, my secretary, the small one that you made.
right.
I mean, you know.
And then Jim Gorham's.
Yeah, you made
bureau.
one for him too, right? Yeah. Bureau.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was Jim and Marty Gorham stopped here. They used to go to New Hampshire. She died last year.
Okay.
And anyway, so they stopped here, and we got to shooting the breeze. And Jim said, well, we were at the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen, and you know, I saw this box that had a lot of drawers in it, and you know, it's could you make one of those? And I said, yeah, I'll make one of those. You pay for the material, and I'll build you the box.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's what I did. And it's solid cherry. And each drawer, and the width of the thing is just under the size that would fit in through the Volvo back end. That's how I made it.
That was the criterion.
Yeah, and the length was, I forget how long it was, but there were 15 drawers.
Yeah.
And I had to, in order to make the drawers, I had to put grooves in the side, so that they put a thing in here, so that the drawers would slide in. So I'd have enough. I didn't have enough room to
Right.
put a regular divide in.
Right.
So I made that, and that was a major project, because lining up the drawers was not easy, and so this is after Catherine had died.
Mhm.
So we went down to Washington one time to help
Yeah, Nathan with the
Nathan
house.
and Vicky with cleaning the place up.
Yep.
And at that time, I said to Charlotte, I said, well, why don't we go down to Williamsburg and deliver this box, or this bureau? And so, called up Jim and said, I've got this box. You want? We're going to be in Washington. We're going to come down if it's all right, if you've got time. So I didn't know how the heck I was going to get it out of the car.
Right.
And as it turned out, they had had a flood because of a broken pipe in the house, and they were workmen. And so we drive up, back the car in, and Jim does one of these kind of things.
Yeah. Just
2 or 3 guys come out, and this was, the drawers were pretty much apart, and they were just stuck in. So these guys come out, pick it up, put it in the house. All I had to do was screw the bottoms on, because they were plywood bottoms.
Yeah.
And he's got 15 drawers with 3 partitions in each one.
Wow, that's pretty nice.
Yeah, did you ever see that?
I did. I saw, well, let's put it this way. I saw it kind of together. I'm not sure it was all, it looked, I saw what it was going to look like. And I think you showed me the pictures.
Anyway, so
the other things that you know,
well, and then I built, along the line, most of the stuff I give away.
right. Well, you've built no number of things for Audubon.
Oh, I built jewelry boxes for Audubon.
Yeah,
I
remember
built
some
stuff for David.
bookshelves for Audubon also. And then this recent stuff for Dave Swift and his wife. Yeah. Well, so Dad, since we're filming, let's not do that right now, but let's keep going. So,
Okay.
because we might as well. So, there are 2 other things I wanted to talk about. One was TM.
Oh, right.
Because that's basically been a big part of your and our lives.
Well, yeah, and when I worked up in the city, there was a bookstore that was next door to Automobile Mutual downtown. So, and I would go in there regularly on at lunch break, and I got to be friendly with the lady that ran the bookstore. She and her husband had the bookstore, and I was interested in esoteric kinds of things. So I saw this book by Gurdjieff, and I went to buy it, and she said, "Are you interested in this?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And she said, "Well, I can introduce you to the people that have been with Gurdjieff, as you know, in France." So that's when I met the Whitcombs. So we did the Gurdjieff stuff, or I did primarily. Mom came up a couple of times for quite some time, and then she died. Mrs. Whitcomb died, and anyway, so at the time, I was looking for something that didn't involve
religion kind of.
Yeah. And so Prudy had been initiated into TM, and I knew that.
I didn't realize that she'd been initiated
Oh,
first.
yeah, she, and because it was Prudy, I kind of
Right.
thumbs down
Right.
that,
Maybe
you know,
some
just,
sort of.
just because Prudy's Prudy.
Right.
And, you know, she's, so anyway, but as time went on, I said, well, maybe this is something that would be interesting to me. And so, fine. So I got initiated in 1975. And basically, one of the reasons that I did it was TM.
Yeah.
And so,
Prudy.
like I said,
Or after that.
yeah, Prudy was initiated in, I don't know, in 73 or something like that. And at any rate, the draw to me was enlightenment in your lifetime, in this lifetime. So I did TM twice a day for 28 years. I mean, you know, a long time. And I got the, you know, the city program and all that, as you did. And then I was out at MIU, I don't know, a number of years ago now. And they had a bookstore out there called the 21st Century Bookstore. And they had a lot of esoteric books in there. And so this one book caught my attention. So I bought it. And it was a guy who was basically a drug dealer. He was in jail and he became enlightened. And so that was that. So, and I read that book, and it was very interesting. And then I was looking on the internet for, he had written another book. So I got on the internet and I was looking, I don't know where it was, Amazon probably. And in there they said, you know, this guy, this may be true, but if you really want to understand this, what you want to do is read this book by Nisargadatta Maharaj. So, fine. So I got a book by Nisargadatta Maharaj, and this is called Advaita, and so the his pupil was Ramesh Balsekar, who's passed away, and it was just a couple of years ago. And that I went over to see him in 2001, just before 7/11, 9/11, and I spent 3 weeks over there with him and with a group of people. And there were a lot of people that had done the Gurdjieff work at TM. There were some high ups in TM, in the TM movement. And at any rate, and that basically, and there's a guy by the name of Wayne Lickerman who's enlightened, who lives just outside of Los Angeles. And anyway, the message there is, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. You have no control over it. And so anyway, that's kind of that story. And to be honest with you, I haven't done TM for a while. However, the fact of the matter is that transcendental meditation, the practice of transcendental meditation really does something to the environment. I really don't doubt that at all. And you know, when you go out to MIU or MUM now, and there's a course like I went out to the 7,000 course, and it's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then, you know, meditating in the dome. I've been out there. I've been out there, you know, out there for many times. But in terms of, and what really disillusioned me about TM movement as such was when Maharishi, there's a guy by the name of Tony Nader, and he's a doctor, medical doctor, and he and Maharishi, whatever reason, I don't know, but Tony Nader was made the guru, the successor to Maharishi, and he just doesn't, he isn't the same person. And he's king. And they gave him, you know, they gave him his weight in gold. That goes over like a
Lead balloon.
Yeah, a lead balloon.
Yeah.
You know, I mean in a major kind of way.
Yeah.
So that's the story about TM as far as I'm concerned.
Yep. And so a couple more things I want to ask you about, but one was about Uncle Jay. We grew up on stories about Uncle Jay.
Yeah, Uncle Jay.
So this is going back a little bit.
Oh,
Just
yeah,
from the present to the past.
I spent many vacations, I should say many, probably 3 or 4 vacations, winter vacations with Uncle Jay. And
this would have been during your high school years?
This was during my high school years, yeah. And Uncle Jay was a real character. He, you know, he took a bath once a year, kind of thing. And one of the stories was that so we're out in one of the sheds, and Uncle Jay says, Martin, he said, go in and make some cream-dried beef, okay? So I go in, and of course he had a wood stove, the old, you know, wood stove. And so I came out and I said, how do you make cream-dried beef? And so he came in and showed me, you know. And so one of the other stories about him was that, and I didn't experience this, but he always had a horse, always had a horse. And Satan was the first horse. And Satan was a horse that could open they had a handle on the door that you pull back, and Satan knew how to do that with his nose. But at any rate, so he had 2 horses at this time. One was a mare, and one was a stallion. And the stallion and the mare was in heat, and the stallion.
Wait, was Satan a stallion? Or?
No. Satan was a stallion.
Okay.
But this other one, the mare was off over here, and the stallion was here, a young horse. And my father was up there at this time, and the stallion, and Uncle Jay goes out to calm the stallion down. Stallion gets up on his hind feet. Bad news. And Uncle Jay goes into the house, gets his 44-40 and shucks a shell, and he says, "That's the end of this horse. He's going to shoot it." And my father lifted the gun up. Jay pulls the trigger, and it goes up into the air. That was the end of that. But and I remember one of the other stories is, so he had a cornfield off below the house. So I'm up there, I forget, this must have been in the summertime. So I'm up there, and Jay says to me, he said, "Hook up the horse and go out and plow the cornfield." So I said, "Well, I don't know how to hook up the horse." So he said, "Oh, come on, I'll show you." So we go out into the shed, get the horse, put a collar on the horse, hooks up a plow, with reins on it.
Yeah.
He goes out, and we go down one row of corn that's probably as wide as this house, maybe 30, 40 feet. Turn, and he said, "You got to swing out around like this to get the next row." Then he hands me the handles of the plow. "See you later," So I plowed the field. I plowed the the cornfield. But that's the kind of guy and one of the other things was he had an outhouse, and the pigs were out behind the outhouse, and as you went out to the outhouse, you went through a shed where he had wood split for the stove, and then it was out beyond that, maybe 50 feet. And in between, there were carriages, and up on the rafters, there was a square-ended boat. And so I went out to the outhouse one time, came back, and I said to Uncle Jay, I said, "Where'd you get the boat?" He said, "What do you mean, where did I get it? I built it." Anyway, and one of the other stories was, it was well, anyway, in the wintertime, he'd sleep in the kitchen. He had a bed that he brought into the kitchen. And there were rats in the house. He always had a pair of 44 revolvers up up here, right next to the bed. So he said, we went up there one time, and I noticed there was a hole. There was a register, where the heat would go up into the second floor. I noticed there was a hole, and I said to Uncle Jay, I said, "How'd that hole get there?" He said, "Well," he said, "there was a rat up there," and he said, I got the pistol out and I shot it, or thought that I shot it because I heard it up there,
And he used to eat for breakfast. What was the cornbread thing that he used
Cornbread.
to? Yeah.
Well, so he made cornbread in a boiler, which is, was about this big. And we'd have cornbread and syrup in the morning.
Maple syrup?
Yeah, maple syrup. And, you know, milk from the cow. I mean, this was fresh milk.
Yep.
And so the story, and everybody loved it. Everybody liked this
But
cornbread.
it wasn't the cornbread was in the milk or something, right? Or
Yeah, you put, yeah. It was you broke it up in a bowl,
yeah.
and then there was milk, and then you put syrup on the top for sweet.
Okay.
Okay.
So you chop it up. It's almost like a mash kind of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, well, there were pieces because
Yeah.
the cornbread was hard, and so the story is that my father decided that he was going to get the recipe for this cornbread. Well, of course, it's a, you know, a handful of this and a handful and a pinch of that and
Right.
all that. So Dad writes this all down. My father writes this all down, and he gets home and he decides that he's going to make some cornbread. Cornbread was like like this. The dog wouldn't even eat it. And we had 2 hound dogs, and they wouldn't touch it. So that was the end of that recipe. Yeah.
Classic.
But when I was in high school, I went up there with a kid by the name of Dick Willie, and I had a pair of snowshoes that David's got now, Second World War snowshoes, and Willie got to use a pair of bear claw, so which are round, which are long, you know, they're like this way. And we took a hike. I had a 22, and we took a hike. Must have been 10 or 15 miles. Well, then the other part of the other, I don't know whether it was the same time, but anyway, the one time we went down and we're headed for this tree at the bottom of the hill, and you know, we rolled off the sled, and I hit my boots in, and you know, did a catapult, and the sled goes misses the tree. If it had hit the tree, we would have been in deep trouble.
Yeah.
And well, anyway, so we finally got back to the house. But you know, one of the there's a yellow swallowtail. A couple of years, we sugared with Uncle Jay, and the most sugar, the number of gallons that he made of maple syrup.
Okay.
He spoke French to the guy that was doing the licenses, and Ron said to me, he said, do you want to keep fish, or do you know, catch and release? And I said, catch and release, fine. So they, you know, I paid for the license and all that. And so the first day, Pierre brings me to this hole. I mean, it's huge,
Yeah.
a big hole, and you can see the salmon, and the water is crystal clear. And so I catch a salmon. First day,
Yeah.
catch a salmon. So I forget. I think we were there for 4 days, and the next day I caught another salmon. A salmon is a certain size,
Mm-hmm.
and as opposed to a gross.
I see.
And so the last day, Pierre, and they have what they call gaspe boats. They're like a canoe, only they're you can't lift them. I mean,
Right.
they probably weigh 1,000 pounds, but they're, you know.
Yeah.
And so we came down the river, and I can cast a fair distance. So he anchors the boat, and he said, "See that rock down there? And it's underwater." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "There were salmon right there." And he said, "Cast to him." So I'm casting. He said, "Just a little bit farther." And I said, "I can't cast any farther." And so the next thing that happened is, like I say, the water is crystal clear. This goddamn salmon goes under the boat, like this, under the canoe. Anyway, so we go down the river and stop here and there and didn't do anything. And we get to this big pool. And so Pierre turns the canoe sideways to make a slick.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, look over the side. There's salmon in there. I mean,
Huge.
Yeah. And I mean, so we got back and we were talking to what's his name?
Ron.
Well, Ron.
Right.
And he said, yeah, he says there's a 54-pound salmon in there. So that was the next to last day. So the last day, I'm fishing in this pool, right? This big pool. And I'm fishing. You fish to a fish,
Mm-hmm.
because you can see them.
Right.
And here's a salmon that's a good sized salmon. And if you've cast a fly, you can tell where the fly goes pretty much. So, and Pierre had said, if the salmon backs up, fish to another fish, because he's never going to take the. If he moves like this, you want to cast to him again, right? So I did that, and he went back and forth like that. So I cast again, smack, and he goes out, jumps, that's the end of it, right? He went right into my backing, and so anyway, we're telling stories, and the story comes out that Pierre is driving his truck down back to the place, Camp Relay, and he says, well, I'm just going to stop here and see if anybody's fishing. So there's a lady there, and she's got this salmon on. So he gets the net out of the back of the car, and
How are we going here? Are we coming?
Yeah, we're almost done.
Okay.
and he goes back, goes down the path, which is probably 50 yards down, and the lady's sitting on a rock, crying, right? And he says, what's the matter? And she said, well, the salmon took all my backing out, and that was it. So Pierre says, follow me. So she followed him, and there's a little riffle that comes into this big pool. And so he goes up past the riffle. Do I tell you?
No,
It's-
I haven't heard this one.
So he goes in, he gets the backing, strings it through the rod,
Yeah.
right? Puts it on the reel, ties it on the reel. She reels in at a 20-pound salmon.
Oh my God. Wow. So he knew where it went.
Yeah, he knew. He said, I don't know whether he was telling the story or Ron, but he said, you know that the salmon aren't going to go very far. They'll go up past the rapids, but they're going to stay
Right.
in there.
Right.
So.
Right. Classic.
Oh, jeez.
All right. Well, yeah. Any final things you want to say?
No.
All right. Good. Thank you.